to welcome you back to Sinai. So we are just a little bit inland from the Red Sea where we were yesterday, and I can't help but make reference to that crossing point, this real place just south of, I think it's called Adibaya, on the other side in mainland Egypt, crossing over that small peninsula to what is called the Musa Coast. The biblical narrative goes together with local tradition. These are the footsteps of Moses and the ancient Israelites when they came out of Egypt. There is so much that happened in this narrative of the crossing of the Red Sea, and it's essential not only for their history, but also for each and every one of our histories. And so I want to emphasize this because when you come to these geographical places and you can actually see them on the map and you can walk, south of this peninsula, walk along this coast of Moses, the Musa Coast, and realize that it's just north of a place called Mara, which we're going to go to in just a moment, you realize, oh gosh, there's a real factual basis to all of this. I remember many years ago when I was working with young people in a lot of different areas of the south of the United States, we stopped in New Orleans, and a young girl who went to a religious school, a Catholic school, came to the club, and she was rather stressed out that day. We were talking about Christmas, and it was Advent and all this, but she said, I just don't know if I can believe in God anymore because my theology teacher told me that the crossing of the Red Sea, the Exodus, is just made up, that it's not real. And she said, how can that be? There's no hieroglyphs that talk about it. There's nothing. It's not true. And as we've seen in these past days, it actually is very true. This place gives credence to that fact and to that reality. And so that's why it's so important to come here and to pray about this. Christianity, Judaism, these are faiths according to not just revelation, but according to history. They're based in history and geography. They're not just made up. They're very, very real. So let's talk about what happened the day after they crossed the Red Sea. What did they see? What would they have experienced? What questions would arise in their hearts and also in our hearts? Now, if we look back at Exodus 14 again, let's just read part of that. Starting in verse 26, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses. This is what they're reflecting on, what happened the day before. Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may flow back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and horsemen. Now think about this scene. The Lord cast the Egyptians into the midst of the sea, it says in verse 27. They have this in their minds. It continues, as the water flowed back, it covered the chariots and the horsemen, all of Pharaoh's army, which had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not even one escaped. Continues. The Israelites, as they're remembering, almost probably looking at their feet and saying, oh my gosh, they walked on dry land through the midst of the sea with the water as a wall to their right and to their left, just like those epic movies that we saw when we were kids, Exodus, these walls of water. It wasn't just a little thing, a parting, and it might be a little bit high so you don't have to wade or swim through, waist deep or shoulder deep water. But this was a wall, just like some of these desert canyons, a wall of water. Maybe they could actually see the sea creatures on either side. You don't forget something like this. And as you walk on the beach that next day, it says in verse 30, Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the seashore, walking amidst these bodies, walking amidst these soldiers, these chariots, these dead horses. Oh my gosh, that's impactful. This is not a little thing. This actually shapes your life and your perspective from this time forward. And it says in verse 31, they saw the great power of the Lord. The Lord had shown his power against Egypt. The people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in Moses. This is what happens. And what's incredible is this is expressed in the song that Miriam led the Israelites in singing. That's why in iconography and in different religious art, you'll always see Miriam, the sister of Aaron and Moses, always with a tambourine in her hand. And this is what it says that she sang. If you go to chapter 15, it says, then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is gloriously triumphant. Horse and chariot he has cast into the sea. My strength and my refuge is the Lord. He has become my Savior. This is my God. I praise him. The God of my fathers, I extol him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. And the song speaks about what they saw. Pharaoh's chariots and army he hurled into the sea. The elite of his officers were drowned in the Red Sea. The flood waters covered them. They sank into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, magnificent in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shattered the enemy. In your great majesty, you overthrew our adversaries. You loosed your wrath to consume them like stubble. And it continues further. I've moved up just a little bit in this canyon valley, and I want to continue reading what Miriam and the Israelite people sing as they go out the next morning and see what has happened. And I think they probably continued singing this song for many, many years to come. And it says in verse 8, the blast of your nostrils, at the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. It's an interesting image, right? But it just shows his breath. And the flowing waters stood like a mound. The flood waters foamed in the midst of the sea. And then recalling what the Egyptians did, it says in verse 9, the enemy boasted, I will pursue and overtake them. I will divide their spoils and have my fill of them. I will draw my sword and my hand will despoil them. And then it continues, when you blew your breath and the sea covered them, like lead, they sank in the mighty waters. You can imagine around the different campfires, parents telling the children the story and repeating the song. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, magnificent among the holy ones? Awe-inspiring in deeds of renown, worker of wonders. When you stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, they're remembering really how much the Lord loves them. In verse 13, in your love, you led the people you redeemed. In your strength, you guided them to your holy dwelling. The prophet Miriam, remember, she wasn't just the sister of Aaron and Moses. She was a prophet, a prophetess. The prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, while all the women went out after her with tambourines dancing. And she responded to them, sing to the Lord, for he is gloriously triumphant. Horse and chariot he has cast into the sea. What I would like you to do when you live your Easter Vigil liturgy this Easter, if you can go on Saturday evening, sing this song together with Miriam. Pray about this event right now during Lent, so you can sing that song with her, with all the ancient Israelites and every single one of us who have been redeemed by the Lord, with all of your heart and soul, kind of putting yourself in their place and seeing what happened, not just during the Exodus when they're crossing through the Red Sea, but the day after, when they realize the completeness of the Lord's victory. So we have to remember and really engrave in our hearts this phrase, which is the motto for our pilgrimage. Out of Egypt, I have called my son. Out of Egypt. This is the moment. This is the realization. Out of Egypt, I have called you. And so we need to take time to reflect on what has happened. Take these passages and read them and let them hit your hearts. They're probably asking themselves, and they respond with this song, who is the Lord? Who is the Lord? Let's ask ourselves the same question. Now, the ancient border with the Egyptian civilization was actually on the map. You can see the wilderness of Shur. They also call it the wilderness of Etham. But it says later in the Bible, in the scriptures, it's like a bird out of a cage that they come. And in that sense, they're just, escaping through and just trying to get their bearings, just like a bird would do as it's being released from a cage. And that really is this first step of freedom, as you see these dead bodies on the shore, as we reflect on what happened. And that is to realize that I need to continually be saved. I need to realize that I am enslaved inside, that I am a sinner. All the people in the world are slaves to sin. Satan is a much harsher taskmaster than their own Egyptian overseers. That's the lesson they're going to learn in the desert, and it's something we have to remember always. St. Paul says in Romans 7, verse 22, the natural man labors powerlessly under the weight of sin. Okay, we know it very clearly. So I need to reflect on that. It's interesting that even John in his first letter, it's 1 John, I believe it's 1 John 1. For I delight in the law of the Lord in my inner being, but I see in my members another law, waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin. As we enter into Sinai, we're going to be speaking about the law that God gives us to keep us free, to free us even further, to break the bondage inside. So this law of sin, says St. John, that dwells in my members, wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? So how are we truly saved? How are we truly set free? The memory of the Passover lamb, of course, is in the minds of the ancient Israelites at this point. The Passover lamb that delivered them is still fresh. Here on the seashore, right behind us, and here as they go into the desert, just trying to take it in. And they might actually ask themselves, is there a Passover lamb that can free me from my slavery to sin? Where is this blood that can cover me like the blood of the doorposts? So just as God called the people, the Israelites, out of bondage of Egypt, he calls us, his children, out of Egypt. He says, come out and be separated. That's in 2 Corinthians 6:17. And live holy lives in his kingdom. Live holy lives. So did this really happen? You bet it did. So touch this, realize this, let it go deep inside. Now I would like to take you to a place even further down the shore of the Musa coast. What's incredible about this trek is we pass by that place filled with palm trees, 70 palm trees and 12 wells, one well for each of the tribes of Israel. It's very interesting, they are still there. But we have the experience when we went through Sinai that, you can't just stop at the side of the road. They have these sites and they've been closed. In fact, Sinai's been closed for a number of years because of ISIS. The pilgrims couldn't really go there because ISIS was there, and there were people that were being not just threatened but also killed. And so they have a very strict security when we go through the Sinai desert. And if you look at it when you come in, my experience is just such a contrast between, the watered Nile Valley, especially Goshen, that's filled with so many crops. Of course, around the Nile is, desert on every side, but there is a life-giving river. There's always water. And I can imagine then that's why they would worship the river as a god, the god Hapi that we talked about. And so the Israelites, even though they see and have seen and have reflected upon what has happened as they came out of Egypt, they're also remembering the green, the bounty, the protection, the water. And this is why they can complain so much. It is so flat in most of the first part of the trek from mainland Egypt into the Sinai Peninsula. It's dry. There's nothing. We see wadis, of course, like this one, where you have a little bit of green thanks to water that comes maybe once a year. You have to know exactly where the springs are to be able to survive. What is this? Why did the Lord take us from such bounty and plenty into this? And you can understand why there were complaints, in a human way anyway, why there were complaints rising up in the hearts of the ancient Israelites. What is going on here? Who is this God? There's no great temples to him. There's no great arks that are carrying him. Is he really with us? Certainly they see the cloud, they see the fire. That helps. But this is a process of trust and a process of growth in faith. And I experienced that just looking at the desolateness of truly the wilderness of Sinai. It's very different than the Egyptian desert. Welcome back to us as we are near the shores of the Red Sea. In fact, we're just a little bit further inland, but I wanted to continue this great journey that we've begun. And this takes us straight to Exodus 15 again, and we're going to chapter 22 so that we can see what happened after this incredible journey through the waters. And this is what is written in Exodus. When Moses led Israel onward from the Red Sea, they went into the wilderness of Shur. And it says, they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. It continues, when they came up to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried to the Lord. And the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. That's actually why I chose this place. We're very close to the Red Sea, so that you can see what perhaps this tree may have looked like. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But let's go to what it's saying here in this Bible passage. He was leading them on into the wilderness. And it says here they went for 3 days. And just at a practical level, if you think about the trauma of what the Israelites have gone through, running for their lives, running for their freedom from slavery, that is an awful lot to process. And think about what it would mean to go through the Red Sea, what it would mean to think that you were going to be slaughtered by the enemy right behind you, what it would mean to see them, washed in these waves of the Red Sea and then dead on the seashore. How would you explain that to your family, to your kids? How would you be able to just, pray about it to the Lord? Thank goodness for the song of Miriam and the women who are praising the Lord on the beach. At least it helps a little bit, but this takes time to process. And then if we remember how long it took them practically, they were leaving Egypt so quickly, they didn't even have leavened loaves. They left probably in a little bit of disarray, even though I'm sure Moses, like we had said, organized them as best he could. So suddenly they've got some time, some breathing space. They've got the sea between them and their slavery. Their enemies are destroyed, and so they can reorganize. They can put themselves into groups. They can prepare, different ways that they're going to survive in this wilderness with the food and with the water and with, organizing themselves into family groups. So this is what I can imagine why it would take 3 days to get from the crossing area to here. It's not too far of a distance, but for 2 million people going through all of this, it makes a lot of sense on a practical level. But let's go deeper to a theological level. Whenever Christians hear the word after 3 days or 3 days, our minds and our hearts go straight to the tomb in the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ. He was there in the depths, just like the depths of the water of death for 3 days. It wasn't until after 3 days that he rose. And then, of course, we also have these allusions in the Old Testament. Just think of the book of Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days in the deep, in death, before he was brought back to life, and a new life at that, when he was trying to run from God. And so this tells us a little bit about what the Lord wanted to teach the people here at this place. The very first allusion to those 3 days. You have gone from death and into a new life. And if we go back to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians, he's actually equating the sea crossing with baptism. This is what he says in 1 Corinthians 10. I want you to know, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea and were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Now the cloud, as we talked about, that is the presence of the Lord leading them. So it's his presence. But they were baptized through the sea. They were baptized into the faith of Moses in many ways. But that was just the beginning of this adventure of this pilgrimage of freedom. So I think many times, sometimes new Christians especially might have the mistaken idea that once I'm baptized, everything is going to be totally different. I'm not going to be sinful. I'm not going to have all these difficulties. I am now a son or a daughter of God, and so everything is perfect. We know that that's not the case. We know that there's a long journey to be, we could say, transfigured into the image of the Lord. In fact, the Eastern Fathers say divinized, made like him. That's a journey. That's a journey of maturity into Christian, to, the faith, the Christian life, the spiritual life. In the same way, the Israelites have a long way to go. This is just the beginning. And it's a beautiful beginning, but it is a beginning of maturity through the wilderness. And you think about wilderness, it's wild. I mean, that's the base word, right? Wild. But these are things which are, untamed, things that are unknown, things that are not ordered, they're out of control. And so that's why I think we'll see as we make this journey, the Israelites need to begin to feel that in their lives, to sense that in their lives. And the Lord does this. Why? So just like it says in this passage of the Bible, they cry out. We need you, Lord. We need you. Just like Moses is learning time and again, he cries out to the Lord, we need you. What are we going to do to really begin to live? And this is why I want to go back to that whole idea. Again, it's the key of life in those Egyptian hieroglyphs, but also the right life, the correct life. It's not just life, it's both of them together. So then they come to Marah. And they were probably very excited because there was finally water. But when they tasted it, they made their camp, they tasted it, they wanted to refill their water containers, and they couldn't because it was bitter. And it's interesting. The Lord makes the bitter sweet. He makes it sweet. And he does this on our journey many times, I think, to encourage us and to say, don't worry, I'm with you. Keep moving. It's difficult, but I will make that bitter journey sweet. So please keep moving forward. Now, it's really interesting when I've ever read this passage of the Bible, it's just absolutely bizarre. So take a tree and throw it into the water and it's made sweet. I mean, that is bizarre. I mean, really bizarre. But after doing a little bit of research, there is actually an answer to the question, is there really a tree that can purify water? And there is actually a tree, and it's called the Moringa oleifera. I'm not a botanist, so I think I said that correctly. And the leaves are very similar to these leaves right here. In fact, maybe this is one of those trees. I really don't know. But if you look it up, it's of this type of bean family, the one that grows along like bean pods, and you've got lots of seeds inside. This tree actually, just like the moringa tree, gives little white flowers that are very pretty that you can use for a lot of things. And so could it be the moringa tree? Well, it's really neat that the United Nations, actually, this was back in the 70s, they started doing these studies, started using the seeds of the moringa tree. Actually, they did studies on women that were using these seeds to purify turbulent water, or like water that was highly turbid. And these were waters from the Nile. There's certain parts of the Nile River actually that are very kind of clear, but there's a lot of it because there's so much silt, which is very turbid. And now it's, got a lot of, pollution and things of that nature. So the moringa seeds are actually crushed and put into water, and it becomes transparent in a matter of seconds. And then the seeds also, they've done these studies, they have antibacterial properties. So even high turbidity waters can become tap water quality in just a couple of hours when these seeds are put in. That's absolutely remarkable. And so what they've seen is that these seeds actually, when you've got these particles that are suspended in the water, somehow they're drawn to the seeds, but those particles are taken from the water. It's just absolutely fascinating. And so you might ask yourself how many seeds are needed to do something like that. Well, their studies indicate that only one seed is needed for a full liter of water. In fact, if the water's not really turbid and dirty, one seed is enough for 4 liters of water. And so with these 2 million people in this place, if you've got a couple of these trees around or several of these trees around, that's enough to make their water sweet. And let's go beyond that. It's not just to drink, but it also provides food. When these seeds are boiled, they become actually nutritious because it, allows them to be digested. And then the leaves, when they're cooked, they're like spinach. They use them actually just as a vegetable themselves to garnish other, meats. You can use it as a spice. But also those leaves, they've looked at the nutritional qualities, 7 times more vitamin C than in oranges, 4 times more calcium than in milk, and 4 times more vitamin A than in carrots. So what else? Well, the bark, the roots, the flowers, the leaves, they can all be used. And in fact, the seeds and the gum on the inside of the tree are antiseptic. And they can treat things like rheumatism and bites. And so you're thinking, man, the Israelites probably stored up on some of this stuff when they found this place of sweetness. They use the seed oil in cooking, the barks and the roots for spice, and even the powdered moringa flour, you can use it for baking. And of course, the wood for building and for fires. Fascinating. But you're like, okay, so where does it grow? Well, currently it actually grows in the Himalayas, but it actually can grow very well. It tolerates poor soil. It can reach a height of I think it's 10 meters high, so that's really tall. And it grows well, this is what's fascinating. It grows well in dry, sandy soil, and it can even tolerate very poor soil like you would find in a wilderness. And so it can be cultivated in many, many places. I love that. There is a tree that can purify water. In fact, I want to try it myself. But let's again go from this just human level, or this practical level, onto a theological level. I never thought about this until I began to pray about this passage. Moses makes the water sweet. It makes the water able to give life, food and water, with a tree. And immediately, theologically, we go to the tree of the cross. In many songs, it's called the tree of the cross. A tree. God purifies life-giving waters with the wood of a tree. Very clearly a prefigurement of the cross. So for us on this journey of freedom in our lives, the cross is the tree that we must learn to throw into the bitter waters of our lives. And it gives us recovery. So you might ask yourselves, what type of recovery can the cross give me? It just sounds like suffering and death. Well, when we look at the cross in what it really is, it actually brings us to our full dignity. On the cross, the Lord teaches us, or actually gives us the grace to love as He loves. And when He loved on the cross, it means that He loved completely, pouring out every drop of His blood. He loved until death to save us. And so He's teaching us, this is how I am to love. And that's how we live to our full dignity, when we learn to love like that. I am called to live this dignity. That's why I have been freed. And this is the message, the prefigurement, the seed of the message that the Lord is giving to the Israelite people. And it also, I think, brings us back to the understanding of the Passover. The blood on the lintels that covered the Israelites and freed them, saved them from death. It's this blood of the cross when we're placed underneath the cross that will bring us again to life and to freedom. So, many times during Lent we'll give up something or something like that, and we can say, yeah, that's what I should do. If I am facing bitterness, again, let me just take up the cross, and those waters will be made sweet, and I'll be encouraged to move forward. All right, so that was one of their first stops by the moringa tree, or at least in Mara. I don't know if it was that tree or not, but it seems so. But then they continued forward to another place on the map, and that's where I'd like to take you right now. So follow me.